Around the world, people want to know what makes Silicon Valley such a hotbed for innovation and entrepreneurship. Silicon Valley, the Untold Story, a new 3-part documentary airing this March on the Science Channel, will uncover the story. And as a community and education outreach partner for the series, the Exponential Center here at the Computer History Museum is thrilled to have all of you here tonight. We've developed a rich set of educational materials for educators 7th to 12th grade, as well as for university and adult viewers. And those will be available with clips, discussion guides, and resources to be able to use with the series, so watch for that in March. We're also very pleased to co-host tonight's special panel and premiere with other partners. We have here executives from each of the organizations that are responsible for this tonight. Of course, CHM Media, Computer History Museum, Science Channel, and also the Sloan Foundation. The premiere screening will follow tonight's panel, so make sure that you not only here for the panel, but also for the sneak premiere. Let's start our introductions tonight focused on the film through our tradition of using 5 numbers. 168, that's the number of years spanned in the film. 48, the number of shooting days. 84, the number of interviewees, some of whom are here in the audience as well. 25, the number of terabytes used to store the footage. 537, the number of script drafts. Who is behind all of this? Now it's my pleasure to introduce the director. It's a pleasure to introduce the award-winning filmmaker Michael Schwartz, who directed this series and also is co-founder of CHM Media. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Michael Schwartz.
Thank you. Thank you. Hello, everybody. Thank you all so much for coming. We're very excited to be able to launch our series tonight at the Computer History Museum, which, as you know, is our community and educational partner. We filmed many of the interviews here downstairs in the Orientation Theater, and you may also recognize a number of backgrounds for the interviews because we shot many of those downstairs as well. A project like this involves the work of dozens of people, many of whom I'm pleased to see here tonight, as well as a number of the people who we interviewed. So, we thank all of you for coming. I want to start by thanking CHM's executive producer, who's also my wife, Kiki Kapani. Most people think she puts the kick in CHM. I get the M. She's my partner in all things who makes everything possible. The Computer History Museum, as I said, has been indispensable to the work we've done. I also want to thank the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation, which was very gracious in allowing us to use their facilities to conduct a number of interviews too. Always made us feel very welcome, and we're very, very grateful for that. I want to thank all of the panelists you're about to meet, each of whom did thoughtful and incisive interviews with us to make the kind of storytelling we do possible. Without their trust and cooperation, we couldn't make a series like this. And I want to acknowledge the incredibly talented team of cinematographers, sound recorders and designers, mixers, animators, composers, writers, editors, and academic advisors, as well as the entire staff at CHM who worked tirelessly for years to make this possible. One number you don't see up there is 31. That's the number of people who worked on the project. A project like these are very expensive, so I also want to thank Doran Weber from the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, which has funded CHM's work for the past 20 years and whose support for this particular project made it possible. And finally, I want to thank Mark Etkind and his incredible team at the Discovery Science Channel, who supported our vision and not only gave us a great home, but also invaluable editorial guidance as we whittled down hundreds of hours of interviews into the 3-hour series that's launching here tonight. And finally, our writer couldn't be here tonight because he's too exhausted from doing those 537 drafts.
Hi, I'm Mark Etkind. I'm the General Manager of Discovery Science Channel. Thank you all for coming tonight. We're very excited about this film. A couple quick thank yous. Obviously, a thank you to Michael. He spent 7 years on this film. So really, he put his life into this, and I have to say I'm personally responsible for probably about 250 of those script changes that he did. The other 250 were John Barden's fault. He's the executive producer, and I want to thank John Barden from Discovery Channel. And a special thanks to Doran Weber and the Sloan Foundation, who are major funders of this, and really thank them. It wouldn't be possible without them. Doran and the Sloan Foundation have been responsible for movies like Hidden Figures and The Imitation Game, and so we're in great company to be part of that group that they funded. And finally, a special thanks to Marguerite and the Computer Museum. I know Keekum and Michael Schwartz are donating all the interviews, and they're great interviews, and they will live in this museum forever. So it's really nice that he's able to do that. I just want to take one moment and just tell you a quick origin story. Silicon Valley, the films are really about origin stories. So I want to tell you the origin story of Discovery Communications. In 1980, John Hendricks had a vision. He loved science documentaries, nature documentaries, history documentaries, and he couldn't find them. He would watch one on PBS, and then he could never see it again. And so cable was just starting. He saw the white space, and he said, I want to start a cable channel dedicated to science and nature docs. And so what does he do? He mortgages his house, gets $100,000, and he realizes he needs $25 million more to start a cable channel. But it's the story of he raises the money, he loses the money, he gets more funding, he almost goes bankrupt. But in 1982, they launched the channel. First documentary is called Iceberg Alley, about the dangerous shipping lanes right off of Canada. And then 30 years later, it's history. Discovery is now the largest nonfiction company in the world. We have 12 channels here in the US. We're about to merge with Scripps and add HGTV and Food Network. We're in 200 countries. Something like 3 billion people watch one of our networks. We're in the digital space with Dodo. And so I know that Discovery didn't start in Silicon Valley, but it mirrors a lot of the stories that you're going to hear tonight and you're going to hear in our series. So enjoy the event, and please do watch the show in March on Discovery Science Channel. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. So we're thrilled now to introduce tonight's panel, our own star-studded group of people who were participants in the film, and they're going to provide their own unique takes on the Valley, as well as comment on a few of the clips from each of the parts of the series. So first, Yang Koum, CEO and co-founder of WhatsApp. WhatsApp, of course, was acquired by Facebook in 2014 for $19 billion, and he has a remarkable story that's part of the series. Kim Palasi is the chairman of CrowdSmart. She led the launch of Java at Sun, and then co-founded Marimba, which she led through an IPO and successful acquisition. Heidi Roizen is an entrepreneur turned operating partner at DFJ. She also co-leads Stanford's DFJ Entrepreneurial Leaders Fellowship Program at Stanford. Steve Wozniak, co-founder of Apple, and also chief scientist now at Primary Data, and a New York Times best-selling author of his autobiography, I Was. And our moderator tonight, Michael Malone, a journalist and technology writer, covering Silicon Valley for more than 3 decades and author of more than 30 books. So join me in giving a very warm welcome to this panel tonight. Thanks, Jan. Glad to have you here. Heidi. Thank you.
Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome. I'm honored to be here, and I'm especially honored to be up here with 4 of these great Silicon Valley icons. There's some remarkable things about this group. First of all, you're not often going to see 4 panelists who've all started wildly successful companies. But even rare as in Silicon Valley, 3 of them are natives. And I think Steve, Hewlett was born in San Francisco. Moore came from Half Moon Bay, but it was really you and Jobs that were the first native Silicon Valleyites who started companies.
Well, up to then, it was more companies would split off. They'd get funded and have a new split off, and that'd be a new company. And then, but for just young people coming out of nowhere, yeah, it was kind of in the early personal computer days is really when that started.
So I was wondering if each of you in turn could give me a little bit of history about yourself. We have the formal bio, but we don't have your beginnings. How did you get to Silicon Valley and when did you get here?
How far back?
As far as you want to go.
92 is when I arrived here with my mom and my grandma, early 92. And we came from, it's always weird, people would ask me where I'm from and I would say like USSR doesn't really exist, Russia, well not really Russia, but Ukraine, but nobody really knew where Ukraine was back then. It was kind of part of it, so it's like the countries just fell apart and like you don't know what to say, but basically it's Ukraine, which was part of ex-USSR, which now kind of became Russia. And so we came here in 1992 and we came straight to Mountain View because we had relatives who lived here, and so by pure chance and pure luck, I ended up right in the middle of Silicon Valley.
So what's your first memory, first image of Silicon Valley?
I don't know if it's Silicon Valley specifically, I think of America in general. When we were driving from the airport from SFO, just the way that everything was lit, like there was electricity, that to me was amazing. Like freeways had lights and you knew, and there were signs and you knew like where you were going and there were signs saying like what city you're about to arrive. Like that to me was just like amazing.
Heidi, you were born in Stanford, right?
I was, yes. I haven't traveled very far.
No.
So I'm the child of immigrants. My parents were from Russia and Germany, and I'm the first American born in my family. So my father settled here. He was an early engineer at Ampex, which sign is still on 280 as a historical landmark, on 101. And my father said to me, honey, you don't need to go anywhere. I've traveled the whole world. I've already picked this place. It's the best place in the world. Just stay here. And he was right.
Yeah.
When did you first know you were in this place called Silicon Valley?
Well, it wasn't Silicon Valley when I was growing up here. It was just my hometown.
Yeah.
And then all these other people showed up. Yeah. But, I think that it sort of, it just evolved. And there used to be people who did other stuff, and now there's sort of just more people who do my stuff.
Yeah.
And so you just started to sort of feel like it was more of a company town. But I don't know, there wasn't an exact moment in time. And this is still my hometown.
Kim? Berkeley.
Berkeley, so it doesn't quite count as Silicon Valley, but,
Close.
but thank you for calling me a native anyway. Close enough. So I came to the Valley actually for my first job out of college, and it was at the first AI company to go public, which is kind of interesting because then AI kind of went away for about 15 years, and then it came back.
What'd your parents do?
My parents were both immigrants as well, and in fact, interestingly, my dad worked here in the Valley. I didn't think of it as a valley, but he worked at a company called Spectrophysics, which was early days of basically designing some of the laser systems, and he would bring home these lasers at night. In fact, I think he worked with Steve Jobs' dad in the machine shop at Spectrophysics, because I learned, reading the biography of Steve Jobs, that his dad would do the same thing, bring home these lasers, and we would play around with them in the basement. So I sort of grew up around tech, and also my uncle worked for Varian, also designing some of the early systems. So again, didn't think of it as Silicon Valley, but just a really beautiful place, and so exciting when I first started working for, it was called IntelliCorp, that first AI company to go public.
Okay, Steve. Sunnyvale?
Getting close to home, yes. Sunnyvale, when it was orchards as far as you could see. Apricots, we had apricot trees at home and collected them all the time, all the way to the end of the mountains, and Lockheed was there.
You and I were neighbors, and what I remember was Cupertino was a distance away. It wasn't just the other side of the sign.
Well, to go to any school, even elementary school, you had to ride your bicycle through cherry orchards, and yeah, there were 3 types of fruit, and it was one of the largest fruit producing areas in the world. So then, bit by bit, okay, my father worked at Lockheed. And the inventor of the transistor moved to Mountain View. And his company, some engineers left and started a new company, Fairchild. And out of there came a few other companies making this little thing called a transistor. Everything we have today, every bit of digital equipment we have today is still based on the transistor. So we were at the start of what was going to become hugest kind of thing in our time. And as it went to chips, from transistor to chips, Lockheed making missiles or something. My father could never talk what he did, but in making the missiles, you had to save every little fraction of a gram, saved so many tens of thousands of dollars, even way back then, that they had to get these chips for the weight cost savings. They could afford it. Only the military and government could afford early chips. New technologies are that expensive. I went to a show when I was 8 or 9 years old, maybe, Westcon show in San Francisco, and a guy showed me a big picture that looked like houses and streets, and he said, we're going to make 6 transistors on one piece of silicon. Whoa. It might have been Gordon Moore showing me that, and I was a little kid, and I went home that night, and I said, now we're going to have better 6 transistor radios, right? And my father said, no, because these newer technologies, they're so expensive, they only go to the military, and people don't get them till they drop out with junk later. I wished always that we'd have consumers, what we wanted at home for a happy, fun life would lead the way. And that was, and so I got to see it happen. I got to be taken down to some of the, throughout my school years into the chip makers like Intel or Fairchild and get to see all their facilities and how they did it. I was really lucky for my father in that sense. And I got interested in electronics. My parents never forced us, you should go this way, you should do this, you should do that. And my father didn't say, you got to be electrical engineers like me. I'm the only one who decided to, and I loved it. It was easy to learn things in books. I loved it. Some people just like all this real specific, everything has to be right type of life, a real structured life, because you miss one comma in a program and it fails. You have to get used to making everything as perfect as you can and being as careful as you can. So of course I became very attentive to rules and following them and keeping them all in my head that I could. I remember reading about tonight, we were going to be on stage and we were not allowed to wear black. Had to put on color, some color.
Yeah. So Steve.
Anyway, I became an early electronics star in science fairs. I was winning Best Electronics Award at the Bay Area Science Fair, and I was in 8th grade competing against 12th graders even.
So I wrote about an amazing conjunction that sort of defines Silicon Valley, and that was about 5 o'clock one day in the late 60s. I don't know the precise day, but you would have been riding home up Bernardo from Cherry Chase swim practice. Bob Noyce would have been racing down, because he always raced, down Fremont Avenue towards his house in Los Altos. And Ted Hoff would have been coming home to that intersection at Fremont and Bernardo. So therefore, the integrated circuit, the microprocessors, and the personal computer all cross paths for that few moments in history.
Well, we're in the right place, I guess. But anyway, yeah, in high school, I started teaching myself how to design computers. No books. There were no books. I didn't know where to get a book. None were in bookstores. How do you make a computer? What is a computer? It was quite a search I'd been going on since elementary school. Some big projects with hundreds of transistors to play tic-tac-toe and never lose or add numbers in binary. And so I finally figured out and started working on paper, on pencil paper, totally self-taught. Never once a rule. Here is how you can put the pieces together called chips and make a computer, and that was fun. And my first computers I designed, one of the first ones was the Varian mini computers of that era, and when I was doing it in high school.
Let me pull you guys out here, because I want to see who you are. So let me ask, a show of hands, how many have been here in the Valley for less than 5 years? Okay, 10 years. 20 years. 30 years. Whoa. 40 years. So there's the sweet spot. How many have been here since before it was Silicon Valley? So that would be 1970 with Don Heffler's article, when it was the Valley of Heart's Delight. Okay. Very impressive, very impressive. Got another question for you. Real quick show of hands. How many here have worked for HP? Lockheed. Okay, we got some missile guys. NASA Ames Research Center. Okay. Xerox PARC. Ah, okay. Fairchild, or one of the semiconductor companies. So throw in National, throw in Intel, okay. Sun. I should have put my hand up with HP. Silicon Graphics. You must feel right at home. I go back so far, I used to hunt squirrels right here. and the overpass ended in dirt right out there. Apple. Google. Facebook. Ah. Okay. LinkedIn. And yet, how many of you are on LinkedIn? Okay, how many of you are on Facebook? Yeah, okay. How many of you use WhatsApp? Those are your friends. Yeah, not bad, not bad. Okay, one last question.
We got some work to do.
How many of you have your name on a patent? Look at that. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so that gives us a glimpse of what Silicon Valley is. It's kind of interesting. Here in Silicon Valley, we tend to look only at the future, and we only look at the present in order to see the future, but we rarely ever look into the past. Well, one of the nice things about this series is it gives us a glimpse of that past, and I think tonight we're going to spend as much time talking about that past as we can, and perhaps see it as a mirror onto what comes next. At some point, Silicon Valley stopped being a collection of electronics companies and became the capital of the technological world. When do you guys think that happened? Was there a moment where it was like, wait a minute, everybody in the world seems to know about us now?
I think we're probably going to give different answers.
Yeah.
Mine's probably the Netscape moment. I think when Netscape happened, I'm not sure if it's when it went public or when it launched 1.0, but I think to me when the web really became accessible because Netscape now was a browser and you didn't have to use links or FTP around to get files. I think that to me was the defining moment that internet finally arrived.
I think about the same time, actually. I think that before that, even Apple, as prominent as it was more of a local or national phenomenon than an international. But I think once we were in the late 90s, that plus the dot-com boom, everyone knew Silicon Valley.
Did you guys experience that moment where when you went anywhere else in the world and they said, where are you from? And you ended up just saying San Francisco or Northern California?
Yeah.
Because you'd say Mountain View and glazed.
Well, even
then
San
all of a sudden
Francisco,
one day everyone went, oh, Mountain View. Yeah, sure.
I was in Abu Dhabi about, I don't know, 7, 8 years ago, and I said, I'm from Silicon Valley, and this group was not impressed. And I said, well, no, I think first I said like Woodside, and they were really not impressed. And then I said, who uses Facebook? And they all were like, yeah, who has an iPhone? They were all like this. I'm from the place that makes those. And then they were super impressed, so.
You know, I'm just thinking back to when I first kind of became aware of Silicon Valley as the center of the universe for tech. And it was when I was in college, actually, and bought my first computer, which was an Apple II, saved up all my money. And I was so thrilled to have this personal computer and felt so powerful. There wasn't a lot to do on it, but there was stuff you could do. There were a few games, very rudimentary, but it was really, really cool. So I'd have to say sort of the era of the first PC, the first ubiquitous PC.
Yeah, I go back a little earlier, kind of around 1974 when it started being called Silicon Valley, because to me, computers were the future of the world. They could do things that were so powerful. And the mini computers meant they were coming down and being available to more and more people or companies, and they were all based on chips. And chips, silicon, is why we had the companies, the major companies, Intel and tons of transistor companies, this huge assortment of what was really the future. And to me, it started being called Silicon Valley only about 1974, maybe, yeah. And to me, that was it. It was, oh my gosh, if you say you're from Silicon Valley, it had importance to the right people. I mean, now it was a valley. You could actually see to the mountains. And, you know, and I was born in San Jose. You can see to the mountains from San Jose. But now Silicon Valley is an oblex term. It's a term that is like the whole San Francisco Bay Area. So it doesn't even sort of mean a real valley. But you go around the world and people think, a valley, oh, it's a valley full of trees and stuff. Well, it's a valley like Los Angeles.
Hey, speaking of chips, one of the things that's happened in the last couple of weeks, it seems like deja vu. Intel has a chip bug. And I thought to myself, we don't even think about chips much anymore. And yet, you talked about the valley, you'll talk about the valley of this upcoming clip as a circle in technology, but in some ways it's still a pyramid, that chips are way up there at the top, and when something goes wrong, it ripples all the way down. Do you all, even in your business, still think about the silicon of Silicon Valley?
Absolutely, because the chips that are made will really determine products that can be built with them by other companies that get the name for it later on. But it's sometimes done years before. Decisions were made by the people designing the chips, what is needed and what will the applications be, what will the markets be.
So Moore's Law still counts?
Absolutely. And also we still, at DFJ, we invest in chip companies like Mythic.
Okay.
Because it starts at the chip.
All right. Good. Let's look at our first clip. Jan, you're the hero of this one.
We've worked on our service.
When it comes to technology, this is the capital of the world. Being here is a whole different ballgame. Silicon Valley is in this never-ending circle of this is where our best engineers are. Why? Because that's where companies get started. Why? Because that's where venture capitalists live and they provide funding for those companies. Why are they here? Because the greatest engineers are here. Why greatest engineers are here? Because the companies are here. It's this never-ending circle of life in Silicon Valley.
Jan Koum is born and raised in Ukraine.
For me, I used abacus in school because we didn't even have calculators. I remember seeing my first computer. I was like, wow. I mean, to me, it was just fascinating. It was like this whole new world.
In 1992, when he is 16, Koum and his mother emigrate to California. His father stays behind. Relatives help them rent a cheap apartment, which by chance is in Mountain View, in Silicon Valley.
The first 5-6 years of living in the United States were tough. We lived in public housing. We had to have financial aid, and we had food stamps. And it's tough on many levels. It's definitely not easy.
Koum finishes high school and pursues his interest in computers at a local state college. But a chance encounter leads him to a job on the network security team at Yahoo, where he benefits from a long-standing Valley perk.
The recruiter who was hiring me, he explained to me this amazing concept of stock options, which I knew nothing about. And I remember sitting in a conference room in Yahoo and we were talking about me joining the company. He was telling me, look, if you work part-time, we can't give you stock options. And I was thinking to myself, what are stock options and why do I want them?
At Yahoo, Koum makes a friend, Brian Acton, who helps him through times of hardship. The death of his father back in Ukraine, and when he's 24, the death of his mother. Koum and Acton stay at Yahoo until 2007, and then cash in their stock options and leave.
I really wanted to do something myself. I just didn't know what yet.
And then in 2009, he gets an idea.
It started with me buying an iPhone.
Koum finds himself annoyed that he is missing calls from friends when he's at the gym. So he creates an app that people can use to let their friends know if they are busy or free. He calls it WhatsApp and starts a business to sell it. Apple agrees to offer it in its App Store.
And that was such a big moment because it was a feeling of achievement. It's like, I've done it. I've built something with my own hands, and now anybody in the world who has an iPhone can use what I've built. That feeling of achievement, there's no way to describe it. And we were so happy when it launched, and we were so disappointed when nobody used it.
Okay, Jan, how many people are using WhatsApp now, as of today?
I think the last numbers that we announced, we have over a billion, sorry. over a billion.
Learn the value of that B.
I'm still trying to come to grips with that. We have over 1 billion daily active users, and that's the number of people who use the application at least once a day. And I think 1.3 billion monthly active users. It's basically people who use it at least once a month, maybe 20 times a month or 25 or 100, but not every day. I think for us, the number that is really important is having a daily count of more than 1 billion people.
Okay, so I'm going to ask a question everybody in this room wants to ask you, because you're responsible. It's very hard to shock Silicon Valley at this point. But when it got announced that Facebook acquisition number, every jaw in this town dropped simultaneously. Did you have any idea this was coming? And what was your reaction when the amount $20 billion comes in? You're still shocked.
Yeah, yes and no. To be honest, we had a really good idea of our monthly active user number, daily active user number, and the retention, which was the ratio of daily users to monthly users. And it was one of the highest numbers we've seen or heard of in the industry, or from our friends, or from coworkers in other companies. I think that
Actually in human history, I think.
Maybe. And so we looked at our graphs from day one, from 2009 when we started, and all the graphs were, up and to the right. It was hockey stick growth. And every time we thought we got to 100 million users, we were like, that's great. 6 months later, we would be at like 200 million users. And 6 months later, we would be at 250 or 300. And so, it's not like we went from one user to, I think when we got acquired, we had 450 million users or so. It's not like that happened overnight. It was a very gradual, it was a lot of work, a lot of sleepless nights, and we knew what the trajectory was.
Well, wait a minute, overnight is kind of a relative term, because not many companies go from a valuation of 0 in 2009 to, in less than a decade, $20 billion acquisition price. So, I mean, this is a pace that, even we've never seen before. So did you celebrate? Did you just stand around in shock? What did you do? None of us are probably ever going to have anything remotely like that. It's going to be kind of nice to know what the experience is like.
To be honest with you, it was all a blur.
Yeah.
Like, people now tell me, do you remember the day you were signing, you said this or you did this? I don't remember any of that. It was like, we were in a conference room with lawyers for probably 3 days straight. We didn't sleep a whole lot. We didn't eat it. Like, we ate junk food. It was just like this blur of basically a week, because you go through negotiating, and then you have to get a bunch of lawyers in a room to figure out all the little details. And then you have to figure out how to announce it. And I remember we were like scheduled to announce it on one day, but we couldn't. And it had to be after the market. When Facebook closes, it couldn't be during the market. And so we had to delay it another day, wait for the market to close. And then we had to get all employees in a room and tell them without them getting suspicious that something's going on the day before. And like, it was just like the sequence of steps we had to take and get it right was pretty hard. We also didn't want it leaking. It was actually probably one of the deals that was done that none of the reporters and nobody in Silicon Valley knew about it, because we tried to keep the team really small and make sure there were no leaks and kind of keep it.
Did you build a company for acquisition, or did you build it for an IPO?
No, we didn't. We didn't build it for acquisition or for IPO.
Yeah,
we were
Teammaker and Marimba.
We didn't even set out to build a company. We just wanted to build a product. We just wanted to build like something cool that people would use. And And then slowly, and it kind of creeps up on you. You don't notice it because it's like, boiling's a frog. It's like one day you wake up and you got direct reports and you got to figure out the office space and you got to do budget and like how many people you're going to hire and you need like VC money and how much it's going to last you and you got to pay for the servers and you got to pay for electricity bill, and if you don't, your servers get shut down. It's just like, it becomes a complicated machinery, and so then you have to hire people who are really good, who you trust, and hopefully hire the right ones. And if you're not, you got to fire, and you got to hire them again. And so like, it gets complicated really quickly. So we didn't set out to build a company to sell or to IPO. We just wanted to build a product that people use. That was fundamentally what we were trying to do.
Now, I'm struck that there was a fundamental shift somewhere 10 years ago, 15 years ago, between building a company with the dream of having to go public one of these days. And maybe it's all the regulations that have come in and all that, and the fact that everybody realized just because you have stock and the company goes public, you still got lockout periods, investing periods, and all that. The shift to maybe somebody big will buy us, Google or Facebook or something like that. Did you build TeamMaker to be bought, or did you build it?
God, no. I mean, my brother Peter and I, a long, long time ago, I joke with him that he built the company because he was lazy, because he determined that it was an early spreadsheet company, and the idea that you could abstract the data from the formulae was something. If you did that, then you would never have to keep rewriting programs. He was a programmer for the World Health Organization. And he was like, I can just make this thing that will do this for me, and I don't have to work that hard anymore. And interestingly, the World Health Organization, he showed it to them, and they just weren't that interested in it. So he said, can I take this out and sell it to the world? And this was, 1979. Like, there were almost no computers to run that on. And so for me, I was actually an English major at Stanford, and I was a creative writing major, and I wanted to be like a novelist or something. I wasn't very good at writing, but
take it from me, I'm
that
glad
didn't
you
stop
didn't
me.
go that way.
Yeah, you opened up the Mercury News, and those jobs for creative writing majors, not so much.
No.
So anyway, I was working on, I had a Corona typewriter and all that, and the first time I used a word processor, it was like a magical experience for me. The idea that you didn't, in my life up until that moment, if you couldn't use whiteout,
right,
you stuck with it, right? And so the word processor to me was a magical tool, and I thought, I need to bring this to other people like me, the non-technologists. And so my brother and I really started the company together because he wanted to sell the product he created, and I wanted to bring personal computing to other people like me who were not technologists. And that was the passion.
That was it.
Yeah.
Kim, Marimba.
So same answer is absolutely not. We did not build a company to be acquired. It was actually about 6 months after we had launched Java at Sun. So 4 of us on the Java team realized that there's an opportunity here to create a company that takes Java out of the browser, because at that point everyone was focused on the browser, and enables automatic updating and remote management of software anywhere it lives, securely, and to devices and so forth, which sounds so obvious now. It's like, of course that's what software does. But back then, it didn't do that yet. So that was our vision, and we were building a company for the long term, certainly not to be acquired, not even necessarily to go public, but just to build something of value that a lot of people could use and that would help companies, in this case we were selling businesses, really transform the way they did business and get a lot more done.
Steve, now the Apple story is well known, but I have to note that the myth of the magical stock option really begins with the Apple IPO. Because you distributed options to a lot of employees, so a lot of people did very well that day.
Well, we didn't exactly want to go public, but because we had so many employees that we had to disperse the records to because they had stock options, it wasn't that much. It was kind of like, you have to already do all the work, all the paperwork, might as well do the IPO. Timing's right, you just pick the time and, yeah. We did not start the company ever thinking that we'd be acquired, though. We didn't, they're probably too young to even know the companies got acquired, Steve and I. But no, we actually planned a strategy in the early days of trying to avoid ever being acquired as we went through a certain price range valuation of the company.
How many people, let me poll you guys again, how many of you out there have made more money in your life from stock options than from salary? Okay, I don't think there's any place on the planet we would see that many.
We didn't have stock options for our founders.
You didn't?
No, we just
stock.
absolutely
They had stock.
stock.
Just stock.
Stock, yeah, it wasn't going to be worth anything unless we followed through, so by options. Also, when we went public, a lot of people didn't have stock in Apple, not many did, because I remember it very well. I thought, why do 3 of us have more money than we'll ever need in our life? Way grossly more. And I'd never started a company for money, never wanted it, never wanted to be in that position. And I said, we're founders, it says. No, our name's on a legal document, that's all. What about these other kids that were around at the Homebrew Computer Club, helping me out, sharing times, looking over the backs and giving ideas and things? What about them? They were like founders. They were there in the garage. And so I gave tens of millions of dollars of my own stock to 5 of those people. And then tens of millions more I sold at pre-IPO price to about 80 employees in the company so they could all make about a house out of us. You know, a company is so successful.
I'm giving you a pat.
So I was the substitute for the stock option
I think
myself personally. Yeah, they show in a movie where Steve Jobs denied, stock to one of the early people, but they wouldn't put in the part about me giving it to them. The guy who played me had read my book and he wanted them to put it in, but they didn't.
And Steve, I think it's telling about the American economy now that I think if you tried to do that now, it'd be against the law.
No, I don't think so. I mean, I did have to go a long period with the lawyers to give them to 80 employees in the company. Are they sophisticated investors? Pre-IPO. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Before we run out of time, ladies, you're next. The clip, can we have the second clip now?
Here we go. If you're not doing something hard, you're wasting your time.
In 1986, Heidi Roizen, CEO of the software company Teamaker, and one of the few women CEOs in Silicon Valley, applies for a $1 million bank loan.
The bank invited me to a dinner of other people like me, other CEOs of technology companies who were applying for debt from this particular bank. And they had this dinner for 10 or 12 of us. And I walked in, and first of all, it was a scotch tasting. I can't stand scotch. Everyone was talking about their golf games. I don't play golf. I was the only woman in the room. I was sitting there, I was thinking, how do I make conversation? How do I get in the game here? It was one of those moments where I just thought to myself, I'm not going to be getting a loan from this bank. And in fact, I didn't get a loan from that bank.
Roizen is far from the only woman who's felt unwelcome in the Valley.
This place is not for everyone. There's a lot of testosterone. There's a lot of competition.
Companies often demand long hours that can be almost impossible for women with children.
You look at a place like Google, which builds in cafeterias, sushi bars, get your dry cleaning done. Everything is organized to make sure that you spend as much time as possible inside the company.
So today, the Valley's high-tech workforce is overwhelmingly male. And yet, women have been essential to the Valley's history.
In the origins of Silicon Valley, women were the assembly workers. They were the production workers. The stereotypes all are that women have small hands. Women can do this very close work that was involved with electronics assembly.
During World War II, some of the first programmers are women.
They were actually called computers because they were computing ballistics trajectories using differential math, and these were math majors. These were the women I look up to who were pioneering and breaking ground and solving really complex problems, not getting a lot of credit for it, but who really established the foundations of computing in some important ways.
But during the decades after the war, women lose their foothold in computing.
Part of the culture of hackers and coders is something that comes out of an era, the 1950s and 1960s, when you end up with a face of the Valley that is overwhelmingly male. And that culture has kind of gotten baked in to the whole system.
But some women find ways to break down barriers.
I was a girl geek. I always knew that I wanted to have a career in the sciences. I majored in biophysics at UC Berkeley, and then I fell in love with software.
In 1989, Kim Polesi joins one of the Valley's top computer companies, Sun Microsystems.
occasionally look around the room, realize you're the only woman, but it's kind of like, well, so what? Now let's get back to business.
She's part of the team that develops Java, the programming language that brings motion to the World Wide Web. In 1996, Polezi co-founds a business software company, Marimba, and becomes its CEO.
As one of the few women CEOs, I got a lot of attention, and some of it was kind of strange. I would be giving a speech about the future of the internet or what Java was, and it would end up being this fluffy piece about, what I was wearing. It was frustrating at times, but I did my best really to ignore the silly stuff.
Led by Polezi, Marimba thrives. When it's sold, it fetches a price of $239 million.
There's one thing that I think has been a theme throughout my career, it's persistence. And anyone that I've seen who's been successful here in the Valley, it's never giving up.
One of the things I've always wanted to ask both you ladies, I've known you a long time, is did you ever imagine you'd be an entrepreneur? Did you ever imagine you'd be an investor in startup companies? No.
No. I mean, probably like you, Heidi, I just wanted to work on really interesting stuff with smart people and, just happened to be that involved building companies and hiring people and eventually going public, but that was not the goal.
So now, how do you teach? And Kim, I've seen you lecture at Oxford. Do you talk to young women and tell them that they can be entrepreneurs? I mean, is that the problem, that the paradigm isn't even in their minds yet?
Well, I do think there is a lot to be said for just seeing someone who has blazed the trail before you. I think that there is if all you see are white men doing something, there's something in your brain that says, oh, that's a thing that only white men can do. And then the first time you see someone break that mold and they're up there lecturing and talking and they've done something, it ignites something in you if you are that same whatever, that, oh, look, there's someone who went before me that did that, I can do it too.
Watching this, I was reminded that until VJ Day in 1945, there were more women working in Silicon Valley, because I know Packard was running 3 shifts of almost entirely women. Mm-hmm. And then the war ended, and they literally, all the ladies got up and said, we're going home to see our husband. He'll come back and take over the job. And it was never anywhere near that again. Mm-hmm. And I'm struck that in many ways, like Annalise Saxadian says, this town's run on testosterone, that in some ways the shift to the code world from the hardware world has actually been harder for women. That it's maybe worse now than it was before. Do you buy that?
Well, I think even when sort of the early days that we talked about, women weren't leading these companies. They were doing important work, but still they weren't in positions of leadership, and unfortunately that has not changed. I would say that in fact, I've been alarmed, and I know, Heidi, we've talked about this, the fact that fewer women now are graduating computer science than when I graduated from Berkeley, from over 30% to now something like 18%.
Despite all the STEM efforts and initiatives and all that?
Right, and I think part of that is what you talked about, Heidi, which is, there's just not a lot of role models out there still, but there are, and also, girls are steered away from computing and science early age. I mean, there's a variety of reasons. We know them all.
But it's changing.
It is changing.
And I think I'd love to tell a happy story. Just today I was at a board meeting for a company called Memphis Meats. And the idea behind Memphis Meats is you can eat real meat without killing animals. And it's an amazing breakthrough company that we have funded. And I was there with one of the other DFJ investing team members, who is also a woman. And we were sitting there and we noticed that the room was pretty diverse, because interestingly, they hire a lot of biologists, and somehow more women seem to be comfortable with being in biology. And so the CEO put up a slide about it was the all hands meeting, and he put up a slide about the people that would be joining in the next few weeks. And it was 5 people.
Yeah.
And they were all women.
Wow.
And I literally took out my phone and I took a picture.
Yeah.
And I said, I turned to Mariana and I said, when do we see this? And she says, yeah, never. Like, we never see this. And it was so exciting to us that here was a company that the next 5 people that they're bringing on board are all women. It was fun. It was super fun.
So I'm curious, both of you spent a lot of your careers as the only woman in the room. What kind of survival strategies did you have to develop? No, I'm really. Did you learn about golf? Did you develop a taste for scotch?
Obviously not.
Yeah.
Obviously not. Well, I'll tell you a funny story. I'm in my spare time, I'm on the board of this company called DMGT. It's a 120-year-old British company. And I was the first woman that they put on the board. So 115 years before they invited a woman to join their board. I go to the board meeting, it's all men. And at the end of the meeting, one of the men turned to me and he said, how was that for you? And I said, well, for me, it was just like another day, but how was that for you? Yeah. So, I mean, I think, it's true. I think Kim and I are so used to, in my career, I was the only woman in the room so often that, it's like we have this dog that I'm convinced doesn't know she's a dog because she doesn't like other dogs, and so she never has seen another dog in the last 5 or 6 years, so she only sees humans, so I'm pretty sure she thinks she's a human, right? So I know for me, I go into a work meeting and it doesn't enter my mind that there's something wrong with me because I'm a woman. And I think that one of the wonderful things about being an entrepreneur, and I so remember when Kim was going through here she was, building this amazing company, and they were exploiting what brand of sunglasses she had on.
Oh, I remember the article about her that was all about her dancing in a leotard, not about actually the
like,
technology.
what man would they write that article about?
Right.
What was he wearing?
And what was frustrating about it to me was that we had a really amazing product and technology that my 3 co-founders had developed, 3 core members of the Java team. And in fact, this technology I just learned recently from some former employees is the software that updates Teslas today, because the company that acquired Marimba was acquired by another company that ultimately, apparently, that's how good it was. And we were doing something really revolutionary, and I could never get the focus on the rest, what the real story, the technology, the company, the team, the potential, where this whole thing was going. So that was the part that really frustrated me.
I'm struck that both of you went through different phases of being accepted and not being accepted. So you in the early days obviously ran into a wall, but you get to Apple, and it seems like Apple was more enlightened. I mean, there was Debbie Coleman, there were women executives at Apple.
No, Apple was a really progressive company, a really interesting company, and a company that I admired from afar. I mean, the Teamaker, the company that I and my brother and some other people started, we were the 5th product to ship for the Mac.
Okay.
Right? So that's a long time ago. And a lot of people think I actually worked at Apple then because I was such a huge advocate for Apple, and I use the word advocate, and critic, right? Critic can go in both directions, right? I remember a meeting with Apple people saying, look, I have more to gain or lose by what you do than you do, because you are working for a big company, and let's say your product is 6 months late, you'll still have a job. If your product is 6 months late, this was the low-cost Mac, I will go out of business.
Yeah.
Because I need the volume to drive the revenue. And so it was a super interesting thing. But yeah, I mean, I think things are better. I really do believe that, and I think
then you go into venture capital, which is an old boys club, if ever there was one.
Yeah, there's that. No, but my firm, we are actually, if you go down the employee roster, we're 50% female.
Are you?
And not all of them are investing partners. Thank you. And I'm super proud of both the women and the men in my firm. But I mean, I really feel like we're a great firm, and I am very proud of that, and I'm very proud of the voices we all have there. And it creates a different tone. And again, still at the senior level, we have more men than women. Yeah. But there's a funny thing, like you notice it. It's almost like you don't notice if you're the only woman in the room because you're used to it. But then every once in a while, like there was this pitch meeting, a couple days ago, and there were more women in the room than men. And it was kind of that moment where I just noticed that the nature of and I almost like I had to ask myself, like, what's different about this today? I'm like, oh my God, there's only like 2 guys in the room and the rest of us are chicks. That was kind of fun. So I think it is changing. I think the next generation is changing, and we all have to be very aware of that.
Yeah, but you got to be tough too. I mean,
well, yeah.
The two of you, I look at Catherine Gould, I look
We're
at
tough.
I look at Catherine Gould, look at Pat House.
Oh, yeah.
You're all pretty tough folks, and I would imagine anything less than that, then this town would have just chewed you up.
Well, it is. It is a little bit generational. Interestingly, I think that our generation, we had to sort of we had to be very thick-skinned to get where we are.
Well, I can imagine.
And it is interesting that we have almost a different mentality about things because we had to wear the brass knuckles and say some mean things and put up with a lot of shit. Can I say shit?
Yeah,
Okay.
you just did.
I've said worse.
They'll edit it in the post.
And I do think that is, I think it is somewhat generational.
Okay. Kim, you had just the opposite. I mean, you were part of a technical team, which seems to be, I think the perception is the most sexist group around, but you were over there at Sun, and they put you front and center on Java, promoting it to the world. So that must have been pleasing for you.
Well, I was a product manager, and that was my job. And my job was to, figure out all the elements that are, everything other than coding in making this product ubiquitous. And I remember feeling this crushing responsibility because I knew the potential of the technology this brilliant team had developed. And I also really appreciated that Sun went out there on a limb and funded this, sort of crazy scheme, because this was pre-web. This was before there was a sort of a platform to get it out to the world.
But it seems to me after that, you spent the rest of your career independent. You're your own woman. They really can't get to you anymore. Was that intentional?
Once you're an entrepreneur, once you have the experience of building something on your own, it's really hard to go back inside to some larger organization, at least for me anyway. And, I love being part of teams, smart people who are passionate and building crazy new stuff. And that's what I want to do for the rest of my life. And one thing that I've kind of transitioned to is not just focusing on technology for technology's sake, but actually applying it to addressing really challenging problems out there in the world, like, people living paycheck to paycheck, or getting more access to funding for entrepreneurs and startups everywhere, not just in sort of the normal Silicon Valley, Boston, Austin, Seattle, and so forth.
One last question. Do you you consciously help women?
Yes, all the time.
All the time?
Yep.
Okay. Good. I'll tell you what, Steve, let's show your clip. And then
I had a relevant comment.
Oh, sure, go ahead.
Well, first of all, I am proud of Apple for being the leader in technology for recognizing gender equality. But and I remember some good days sitting on a staff meetings right next to Heidi. But okay, when we started Apple, I only had 3 years of college, and I'd grown up in technology, electronics, engineering, and it was heavily male-dominated. But now, 10 years later, after plane crash, 5 weeks of amnesia, I called up Steve Jobs and said, this is my last chance to go back for 1 year of college to get my degree. Macintosh Group is in good shape without me. So I went back to Berkeley under a fake name, because my name was known. So my Berkeley diploma says Rocky Raccoon Clark. But I went back and I had to take computer science courses. And in the computer science courses, the enrollment was about 3/4 from Southeast Asia, because Berkeley was real popular in those parts of the world. And of the Southeast Asians, it was 50-50 gender split, not among the Caucasians. So there's something in culture that's a lot harder to pin down, what are the reasons for things happen. It's not that we just want it to be that way. It's just deeper. Childhood, peers, teachers, movies, books, everything. Everything about our culture.
Let's go to the final clip.
Today, it's the world's most valuable company, worth hundreds of billions of dollars. Its longtime CEO, Steve Jobs, is revered as a visionary.
They call him the Babe Ruth of Silicon Valley. From the first Macintosh computer to the iPod. Home
He
run.
wanted to solve big problems. He once asked me, do you think it would ever be possible for me to be president of the United States? He was serious because he did not see any sort of problem that was insurmountable to him.
Steve Jobs was very driven to make something that was better than other people could make, that was further out beyond what other people were thinking of.
But Apple's journey to the top is a story of near misses, frustrations, and failures. When the company is founded in 1976 by Jobs and Steve Wozniak, they are nearly broke. So they asked Jobs' former boss at Atari, Nolan Bushnell, to invest $50,000 in return for a 1/3 share in their company.
The proposal was, Nolan, would you like to invest in this computer company? I had a chance to own 1/3 of Apple Computer for $50,000, which I declined.
Why do smart investors miss good startups? Because it's very, very hard to predict what a startup will turn into. When you see Apple, you don't see Apple in its present form, worth hundreds of billions of dollars. You see Apple as these two disreputable college dropouts with beards. And now they've got this microcomputer that a few equally disreputable looking hobbyists are excited about, and that everybody in the computer business says is this inconsequential toy.
It is Wozniak who designs and builds the computer that will later be known as the Apple I. But in the beginning, he wants nothing more than to hand his creation over to his bosses at Hewlett-Packard, the legendary Valley Electronics company.
I was going to work there for life as an engineer at the greatest engineering company that respected engineers the most. So I told Steve I had to offer it to Hewlett-Packard first, and I offered it. I implored them to build it, what it would cost. I wanted my division to build it. I'd be a hero in my division. And they turned me down for the first of 5 times. There was no obvious market. There was no obvious money in it. So Steve and I got to do it on the side. A lot of lucky accidents, or Apple wouldn't have even had a start.
So Steve, I'm not going to ask you if you could imagine that Apple would become a $1 trillion company, which is about to do, but did you...
Well, when we started the company, the amount of memory that would hold a song cost about $1 million.
Wow. But when did you think the company was going to make it?
Oh, from day one.
Really?
From day one. Oh my gosh. This machine was a little more than people realized, this Apple II computer that we were really starting it with. It was the first time ever that arcade games would be in color, the first time ever they were in software. Consumers could buy it, and 9-year-old could program in a day, make colored things move on a screen, simple little commands. Oh yeah, that was a huge step because gaming was the only thing that was going to bring computers into the home. You don't do salaries and inventory and sales records in your home. So you had to have games.
Now, I knew both your parents, and I knew your dad, and I get the impression he was perfectly happy to stay at Lockheed as an engineer for his entire career. Did you have that same goal at Hewlett-Packard when you started?
Well, I had more than that goal. I had just determined that that company was just full of engineers from the start. Engineers were respected, and in those days, Hewlett-Packard wasn't today's Hewlett-Packard. It was a Hewlett-Packard that only built test equipment with dials and knobs and push buttons and scopes and screens, only things that engineers used. That meant that we engineers designing the stuff were designing it for ourselves, for other engineers. We had the marketing as well in our heads. We knew what was good, what was bad, and what to do. And that was the company I wanted to be with forever. I did not want to go up the chart because I had determined to be non-political, to never vote, all that kind of stuff. Non-political, and you get up in a company and there's a lot of, you hear stories about people trying to vie for position and backstab and that kind of stuff. I can't do that. I'm just too soft or something. So I'd be an engineer and I'd never be able to be kicked out of anything. When we started, I wouldn't start Apple. Actually, I said no to the big money at first, and then I finally accepted it. But the term was I would only do engineering, keep me out of business.
You were working for the Advanced Products Division of HP.
Hewlett-Packard.
Which was, in many ways...
By the way, you don't know, those 2 buildings of the Advanced Products Division aren't part of the huge lot that Apple bought for another division of Hewlett-Packard. Yeah, so where the Apple II and one were invented was right there.
But looking back, that division was closer to Apple than any other company in Silicon Valley. In the sense, you were in that beginning of that kind of a culture. It was pretty freewheeling. It was a real maverick organization inside of HP and all that. So if you had stayed there, you would have moved to Corvallis, Oregon.
I wanted to. My wife at the time didn't.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah, Apple would have never happened.
So what made you decide, I mean, was because you had built the Apple computer that it was like, I'm going to jump and become an entrepreneur? I mean,
No.
you seemed the most reluctant of the entrepreneurs
No.
that did really well.
Never. I didn't want to start a company. I didn't want to start a whole industry, although I knew it was important and big, and that was part of my motivation, was what it would do for people socially, what it would give us more abilities. No, I wanted other engineers to look down and say, whoa, how did he think of those things? There was in a period in my life where the thinking was so different than any books, any engineering books. So I only wanted to be judged by engineers, sort of like a show-off. My engineers will look at my stuff and they'll appreciate me as an engineer.
Now, the guy from Y Combinator talks about how you guys look like scruffy college dropouts. And it was nice to see.
I didn't like one of the words he used, disreputable. No.
Yeah.
Not myself, certainly.
Wait a minute. It's nice to see Fernandez. I haven't seen him, and his dad was my Sunday school teacher, but I remember seeing you and Jobs and Fernandez buying parts for the Apple I, and you were pretty scruffy. I mean,
scruffy, but disreputable.
You guys, I honestly thought you were buying alligator clips for the motherboard of the Apple I, and I thought you guys were buying roach clips. I think everybody who saw you thought you were buying roach clips.
No, I never used an illicit substance in my life, despite I was real into creative thinking, no.
So at some point, Apple gets too big, and you leave. How do you follow Apple? I mean, was there a period of time? I mean, I remember you telling me once that you actually dreamed in assembly code for a certain period of your life.
No, I would go to sleep with either math problems from school or computer problems that I was working on, hardware or software, in my head, deliberately thinking real hard as I fell asleep. And very often I found I wake up very often in the middle of the night with solutions. And then one morning I woke up and I couldn't remember what the solution was in the middle of the night, so I started writing them down. And then sometimes they were good and sometimes they were bad.
So, but at some point you had to leave your baby behind and leave the thing that made you so famous behind and strike out. And I've always been struck that would have been a very difficult transition for you.
It's a little different than that. Apple was so big a part of me and I was so loyal that I'm the only person who's been on the payroll every week since we started the company to today. Yeah. Small paycheck, but it's kind of token, but it's important to me. So I never technically left the company. I'm still under some employment agreement from 1975, I guess. They won't fire me. A matter of fact, a year after Steve Jobs died, my wife, who was working in Apple Education, went on the company computer inside and it said, oh, who reports to whom? I was still reporting to Steve Jobs. I said, good, I can't be fired. But I did depart in a sense that I had that airplane crash and amnesia, and then I went back to Berkeley and I studied more psychology than in engineering. And made some good strides there, actually. And then I came back to Apple as an engineer, working on products again, and reviving Apple II series after the Apple III finally got killed off, and we had a new CEO, John Sculley. And then after some time, oh my gosh, I get the idea like Kim was talking about. Want to be with groups of people just thinking of neat ideas and new things we can do? That'll usually be 1 or 2 people or 5 people at the most. Around a lunch, here's what we can make for a product. And the idea popped out to build the first universal remote control that you hold in your hand and you can operate different things. And it was in a day when in the United States, people only had 2 remote controls, television and VCR. Except a few of us in the United States bought a Laserdisc. 3 remote controls. There was one hi-fi in the world that had a remote control, a Bang & Olufsen. I had it, so I had 4 remote controls. And satellite TV didn't exist, but you could build your own big dish, which with some help I did, and then got a receiver built by a guy in Canada that came with a 5th remote control. I was the first person going back and forth between remote controls, so that was a great company. Yeah, great product.
Okay, we have some questions from the audience, but before I do, I have actually one more question for you that I think everybody out there wants to know is, why are you still at Facebook? I mean, I think, you know, you read about people winning the lotto, and it's like 1,000th of what you managed to achieve, and they go home forever. They quit their job and everything else. You still show up every day at Facebook, don't you? And what is your motivation? What keeps you going?
Well, only half of this room still uses our product.
Right.
So we still have a lot of users to convince to use our product. But we also have a responsibility to people who are already using WhatsApp. We have responsibility to build quality functionality. We have responsibility of building new features. You know, it's not like we've been just doing messaging for the last few years. We've been doing video calls and voice calls and rolling out features that you'll see actually coming out this year as well that I think help people communicate and stay in touch with one another. And we also have, you know, we don't necessarily solve hardware problems that I can imagine are way more challenging, but we still have problems to solve. I mean, when you try and get people connected on a really bad 2G network somewhere in a third world country, it's challenging, and you have to worry about message reliability, you have to worry about service reliability and uptime. So there's still challenges and problems to solve.
Is that why you guys are all serial entrepreneurs? Because of the challenge, the technical challenge, or is it the company building challenge that keeps you guys going?
Not the company building.
Yeah.
It's the other people.
Okay.
No, we just get to work with, you know, I was at this meeting this morning and I walked out and I said to the CEO, you have no idea how much fun I just had. To sit with a room of people that are trying to do, these people are trying to end animal suffering by allowing meat eaters like me to be able to eat meat without killing animals. I mean, it was so energizing to spend a day with these people that's why you do it. I mean, being a VC is like the greatest job in the world because you don't actually have to think of anything awesome.
Right.
You just have to know how to get other people who are thinking of awesome things to come to you. And so it's like, what could be more fun than that? That's what gets you out of bed every day and makes you happy it's Monday.
Okay, so Kim, you're the true serial entrepreneur up here. Why do you keep doing it?
There is, as I think has been said, there's just no shortage of interesting problems that need solving. And I mean, wow, being able to get up every morning and work with smart people that you love to be around on solving those problems, I mean, what could be better? I can't think of anything. And I would love to see more of this outside of Silicon Valley, you know, the sort of Boston, Austin, Seattle, the sort of the New York, sort of the 5 places in the country and a few places in the world where we're seeing sort of the breadth and depth of the innovation that's happening. So that, to me, is one of the things that I'm passionate about and want to help make happen.
Steve.
Yeah.
I remember seeing you at Cloud9, and it was right after you'd left this gigantic, famous company, and you were just working by yourself in an office.
With a few friends and a neat new idea. That was the most fun thing ever.
Okay.
But I was still officially an Apple employee, too. A lot of people think I left Apple. No, I have a nice letter written out that I wasn't competing with them. I showed them what I was going to do on a blackboard. I wouldn't dare, you know, be like, I'm trying to do something secretive behind you.
But you're still doing it.
Still doing what?
Still creating.
Yeah, but no, not the same, though. It's not the same.
Yeah.
I had about a 10-year period where I look at my own designs and where did those ideas come from? Why was it so different than anything before? How do you do color instead of spending $5,000 of today's dollars? How do you do it with $0? Instead of putting a number into a machine to make color, the number is the color. What? Put it on the wire into the TV, it is. I mean, I don't know where these things were coming from, one after another. So I look back, but creativity is the most important thing to me in the world. When I raise my own children, when I raise my dogs, everything. I just want creativity. What are the elements? There is no formula for creativity. It's personality, you know, but you got to have kind of enough freedom to be able to do your own things and try your own things, or you'll never find out if that's what you want to be and do. Most people say entrepreneur is a business category. A business person. I know how to write the spreadsheets and take care of this marketing, do these considerations and sell it and pitch it. No, you need a lot of disciplines though for entrepreneurship. You need the business thinking like that. You need marketing thinking, and you need engineering. So I say start everything with a product pre-made like we did at Apple, with a working prototype, a working model, and you're well ahead of the game. And especially if you go to raise money, here's my working model. Well, you'll own more of it.
Let me take a question for you guys. This simple answer. If you were starting off with the internet today, what would you do differently? If you were building you don't count on this one. You guys, if you'd had the internet when you were starting your businesses, how would you have done things differently?
Well, in our case, we did have the internet. I mean, the marimba was all about, okay, how do we take Java out to the world and out to the internet more broadly for businesses? So,
but not the ubiquitous 3 billion people using it.
Right.
Yeah, I think internet gives you access. The addressable market space all of a sudden becomes very easy for you to access, because anybody can publish an app in a iTunes or Google store, and all of a sudden you have hundreds of millions of people at your fingertips who can download your app overnight. So, in the 90s, getting to 1 million users or 5 million users was a huge milestone, or 10 million users. Today, if you launch an app and you don't get to 10 million users, it's almost considered like you haven't tried hard enough. You should be getting to 100 million or 200 million at least, given the access.
It's been suggested that the scalability and the low cost of adding incremental new users because of the internet has changed Silicon Valley. That from 1995 basically till today, the valley has been defined by software, by code. Well, before that, it was based upon building new platforms. Now, some people are suggesting we're going back to hardware, but do you think this last 20 years has been good for the Valley? Has it made things better? I mean, it's certainly made entrepreneurship cheaper, but it's also distorted the culture of the Valley in some interesting ways.
Yeah, I mean, you can't argue that in terms of wealth creation, in terms of influence to the whole world. You can. As people say, well, why is venture capital, why is it all here? Like, well, I can drive a half hour from my house and be at the world headquarters of most of the most influential companies in the world today. That means something, because again, going back to my thing about people, it's all about the people who are in those places doing things. So, I do think it is a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, we are in a place where people really believe that anything's possible and they can do anything. And actually, many of you in the room are those people who did the impossible. And so there's a reason we're all here, and it's an amazing thing. But, when any of us sit in the traffic, especially you're born and raised here, you're like, oh my God, I gotta go to the city. I'd rather fly to New York than drive to San Francisco and find parking. So,
are those problems ultimately
and the
fatal?
socioeconomic disparity that we have here, and the issues that we see among our friends and our own children who are not able to buy homes here, and there's a lot of downside. And
will those factors kill the Valley eventually?
No, nothing kills the Valley.
Nothing kills the Valley. Okay.
Thank God for that.
Okay, let me ask you one quick last question. We are out of time. Are entrepreneurs the same? I mean, we've gone through Mad Men, button-down, skinny tie entrepreneurs. We went through T-shirt entrepreneurs, like that guy down there. We went through super techie guys. We went through MFA.com founders. We went through guys in hoodies, entrepreneurs. They all look very different, but are they all the same within? Has entrepreneurship changed?
I think
part of your personality, you either are you want to go out and do new things, be sort of an inventor as part of being an entrepreneur, or you just want to be an engineer who's been trained and can get the job done. There's two different types of personalities, and some of them, if you want to, I've got this thing I made, I want to go turn it into something for the world, that's just inside of you.
Right.
Okay.
And I think what's changed is maybe just the perception from the outside world, or a lot of the outside world, that it's more sort of glitz and money and driven by things that are not about creativity and building something of value. And that is frustrating to me. I'm sure everybody in this room.
Yeah.
But I think deep down, the entrepreneur lives.
So you guys all had to write on a card one word that describes entrepreneurship. What'd you write?
I didn't. I just came here from work, so I didn't get a chance to do that.
Well, that's telling about entrepreneurs too. Yes, what'd you write, Heidi?
Tenacity.
Tenacity.
Curiosity.
Curiosity.
Like that. I wrote passion, and I put a heart with a notch out of it, a bite out of it.
Everybody, thank you for coming tonight. I hope you've learned a little bit more about Valley history. And I want to thank our wonderful panelists, Jan Kuhn, Heidi Roizen, Kim Polizzi, and Steve Wozniak.